All right, it's a true honor to welcome you to one of the most important conversations we'll have at this year's conference, Lifted by Legacy. Today, we have the rare opportunity to hear from the visionaries who laid the foundation for everything OBAP stands for. Long before there were hundreds of black pilots in commercial flight decks, long before DEI initiatives became buzzwords, long before our scholarships or academics or our flight schools, there was a small but mighty group of pioneers who dared to change the face of this industry. They did it in the face of discrimination, exclusion, and doubt. They did it with courage, unity, and purpose. And because they did it, we are here. It's only fitting that we pause today to not only honor their legacy, but to learn from it, to understand the conditions they face, the choices they made, and the future they dream of. And to guide this conversation, please join me in welcoming our moderator, my best friend, and today's session is OBAP leader in his own right, Captain Jeff Harrison.
Thank you, dear. Oh, I'm mic'd up, so that's even better. Hey, everyone. Jeff Harrison. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I hail from Maryland. And it'll make sense when I read a letter to you in a moment. So nobody in my family was a pilot. I later learned that my dad, his dream was to become a pilot. But because he lost both of his parents before he was 15, he had to drop out of school and then fend for the family. Because of that, limited opportunities. So he was a custodial engineer, fancy word for janitor, right? A lot of things, barriers in his life, but they valued education. My parents did, and one of the things is, I went to the Air Force Academy and then learned of an opportunity to become a pilot. A black pilot, who knew that it could exist? But I remember being a part of our Black Student Union, if you want to call it that, the Way of Life Committee. Myself and Ray Robinson, back in the mid-'80s, challenged everybody that went to the academy that could pass a physical to try it, because who knew, you might like it. And that first flight was, like everybody else experienced, wow, life-changing. And because of that, I stand committed, I stand inspired, and most of all, I stand on you all's shoulders. So let me tell you about the surrealness of it all. So there's a letter that started March 25th, 1976. Route 7, Box 184, Annapolis, Maryland. 17 miles from my birthplace, the childhood home. And it says, gentlemen, in 1963, blacks made a rather conspicuous debut in the field of commercial aviation with the landmark court decision, Colorado Anti-Discrimination Committee versus Continental Airlines, which struck down discriminatory hiring practices in the airline industry. Not only do we owe many thanks to the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Committee, we're also deeply indebted to Captain Marlon Green, Continental Airlines, for having the tenacity and temerity to fight for his rights in pursuing a career in commercial aviation. 13 years later, we have seen the number of black pilots increase to a meager 80, which represents less than 1% of all commercial pilots in the US airline industry. Yet, this minute percentage of black pilots represents an extremely volatile, potent force, whether it be socially, economically, or politically. Consider this for a moment, that our combined incomes exceed $2,600,000, which would rank us among Black enterprises' top 100 Black businesses. You will also have to agree that using the pyramidal type analogy, each of us representing the apex are affiliated with or know an extremely large number of people who are viable socially, economically, and politically. Given these parameters, one can only deduce that we as a group are totally fatuous for not developing and utilizing our potential. The question one now asks is, how? The answer, quite simple, is collectively pooling our major resources, knowledge, skills, and talents. In this bicentennial year of our nation, we have an opportunity to write a new chapter in the annals of aviation. History, by becoming an integral part of an organization dedicated in fostering minority interests in commercial aviation, I extend to you an invitation to become a member of the Black Professional Pilots Association, BPPA. What is BPPA? Nothing more than a vehicle by which we can effectuate positive change on a local, state, or national level. A means of promoting interest in commercial aviation among Black people. A means of promoting camaraderie among professional Black pilots. In short, BPPA is anything positive the membership desire it to be. Needless to say, the problems confronting the BPA are not unlike those confronting any neophyte organization. A constitution or bylaws has to be developed. Definitive programs have to be formulated. Positive and realistic goals must be defined. There is a need for a logo. These are just a few of the myriad of problems besetting us. In spite of these seemingly insurmountable obstacles, I feel most confident that the BPPA will become a dynamic, omnipotent force in commercial aviation. I enjoin you to seriously consider becoming a part of this infant organization and help nurture it into one of the, which is mature, responsible, and effective. In the field of aviation, we are constantly reminded of the fact that complacency kills. Gentlemen, we have been dead for the last 13 years. It is time for us to rise and give a damn. So when I read that, I had an out-of-body experience. One, it's the first place I got a job in Annapolis, Maryland, 17 miles from my hometown. Two, the same argument that Ray and I challenged our classmates is everything that was written in this context 10 years earlier. Same storylines that you kind of hear today. So that's about me and what I've done. But let's start back at the beginning, gentlemen. Can each of you share where you were in your career during the early 70s and what the landscape looked like for the Black pilots at that time?
Well, the landscape wasn't great because we didn't have an organization.
I think the mic is...
Is it working?
There you
Okay. The landscape wasn't great. And just like today, there were many forces that were against the idea of African-American pilots. So it was a struggle just to get it started.
Okay. So but before we go any further, let me make sure everybody knows who sits in front of you on the dais. Captain Bill Norwood, Captain Perry Jones, Captain John Bailey, Captain Chuck Rich. So if you can tell what your significant well, not one significant, but one of your significant claims of fame are who you worked for, what number were you far as African American pilots for your company?
Well, I worked for United Airlines, and I chose United Airlines because we had no mentors in the airline industry, because my wife and sons had flown on United and they liked it. So that's when I went to United. And when I applied to United, most people get to see the chief pilot or something like that. When I went to United, they wanted to take a look at me, who the possibility of being the first African American pilot, and see how I would act. No chief pilot interviewed me, no pilot interviewed me, but we got interviewed by 5 different vice presidents at United Airlines. I never talked to a pilot. And so they wanted to take a look at not only me, but my wife to see how we would fit. So we were invited to dinner 5 times. I took them to 5 of the most expensive restaurants in San Francisco. You know the game they're playing. But that was my introduction, and I find it so much different because most pilots are interviewed by the chief pilot or someone.
Captain Jones?
Well, I started out with Pan American World Airways. And coming back from Vietnam in 1965, I was looking for a job. So I went down to the airport in San Francisco and I spoke with a young lady and I said, where do I go to find that I can get a job flying for one of the airlines? And she told me there's Pan Am, TWA, American, and United. Pan Am was the first airline that I went to. So I went there and this lady asked me, can I help you? And I said, yes. I said, I would like to fly for Pan American. And she said, are you a pilot? And I said, yes. And she said, well, you'll have to speak with the chief pilot. And she came back and she gave me a piece of paper and I had to fill out some things. And then she said, okay, come with me. You can speak with the chief pilot. When I went into the chief pilot's office, he was very welcoming. And he said, so you want to fly with Pan Am, huh? And I said, yes. And he said, well, when can you start work? And I said, well, I just came back from Vietnam and I would like to have about a month off. He said, well, I don't think you realize what goes on in the airline business. He said, we work on a seniority list. And if you come, the first one who comes has the highest seniority list. And he said, well, can you start in December? And this was November. And I said, well, let's see what I can do. He said, but first you have to take the Stay 9 exam. And that was a test that took about 8 hours. And he said, well, we don't have a Stay 9 test now, but United has a test that is going to take place on Saturday. It was Thursday at this time. So I went over to United, took the Stay 9 test, and United says, well, we would like to have you come to work with us. And I said, well, where would I be working? They said, well, Chicago. And I said, what would you be flying? Would I be flying? They said, well, the DC-6, and you'll be flying low and slow. And I went back over to Pan Am, and I said, well, you would like me to come in on the 6th of December, what would I be flying? They said, well, you'd be flying the 707, and you'd be flying out of San Francisco, and you'd be flying around the world. And I said, I think the 6th of December sounds pretty good. But yet I said, well, what position will I have? They said, well, we have 2 positions that you can start out as a co-pilot flight engineer or co-pilot navigator. And I said, well, how much money is being made? And he said, well, the co-pilot navigator makes about $425 a month. And I thought about that, and I said, how much does the co-pilot flight engineer make? He said, $1,096. I said, that's a no-brainer. I'll be a co-pilot flight engineer. And so that's how I started my career with Pan American World Airways on 6th of December, 1965.
When I was in Vietnam in 1972, I spent a lot of time talking to Air America pilots. And I asked, if you were getting out, what airline would you fly for? Most of them said Delta Airlines. I said, who? I never heard of Delta Airlines. I'm from Buffalo, New York. And so he said, Delta has never furloughed a pilot. They've got great relationships between management and the pilot group. It's a good carrier, it's a sound carrier. One day, it will be the largest carrier in this country. This is 1972. Left Vietnam, was hired by Delta in 1973, January. I really didn't apply. My friend Chris Franks had interviewed with Delta, and they asked him, do you have anyone else you'd recommend for us? He said, yeah, I've got a buddy in Buffalo, New York. He may be interested. So I get a call from Delta Airlines asking me, would I mind coming to pay a visit in Atlanta? I said, well, we've got 12 inches of snow up here in Buffalo. Sure, I can come down. So they sent a ticket for me to fly from Buffalo to Atlanta for not an interview, for a visit. So when I got there, there was no one else in the employment lounge. I was the only one. So they're waiting for me in their office, said, Mr. Bailey, thanks for coming. Have a seat. Can we talk? Sure, I have nothing else to do. So we had a civil conversation, very nice conversation. He explained to me why he felt Delta was the airline for me. I wasn't sure. At that time, I had considered Eastern, American, and Continental. I really wanted to go to Continental. And so he said, here's why you need to be here at Delta. We want you. We want you. You will want to fly with us. He said, but I want you to go downtown to meet with our psychologist. It's just part of the normal process. I said, sure. I did that. That took about 30 minutes. I thought, okay, so far so good. So they invited me to come back again. I said, well, no, I think let's just let it rest here, and I'll let you know. Well, I didn't have to. A week later, I got a letter saying I was hired by Delta. Never applied. And that's how I ended up at Delta Airlines.
Wow.
As you can probably already tell, I'm the baby of the group up here. My history takes me, my dad was in the military, so I moved around most of my life. I went to school at the University of Hawaii, and that is where I learned to fly. All Air Force bases have a flying club, and I got involved in it pretty early on, learned to fly there. And my first, we have to fly out, as you all probably know, you have to fly a cross-country flight, and a cross-country flight in Hawaii relegates that you fly across water, and as a new pilot, you're constantly looking behind you to make sure you haven't lost sight of land before you see land on the other side. And it was kind of a hazy day for me that day, and I got out in the middle, and lo and behold, couldn't see behind me any land. and couldn't see in front of me any land. But I did have a compass. And that compass got me to a position where I could finally see land on the other side. And I decided, well, it looks like I'm going to make it. Starting with the airlines, I went through pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. And back in the older days, you don't just get to go to the base and get into a real airplane. They send you down to a little place called Eloy, and you become what's called the shoe pilot, because you're flying with another 172 or something very similar to that, and you're flying with a bunch of civilian guys that are pretty crusty and old, but I had a very, very informed instructor there. He was a retired airline pilot from American. And he asked me, well, what's your goal? Well, my goal right now is just to get through pilot training. Well, after that, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to stay in the Air Force forever. Well, that turned out not to be what I ended up doing, and obviously got out as quick as I could as I talked to more people that were involved with the airlines. Because I had been back and forth to Hawaii a few times, and every time that my family would travel back and forth, I was very familiar with flying on American Airlines 707s. And so that was always my thought process in the back of my head, was that I wanted to go to work for American. After I got my time in the Air Force and decided I was really going to get out, I had been in Phoenix for quite some time, or in the state of Arizona for quite some time, and the carrier there that most of the people that got out of the Air Force there was Hughes Air West, and we called that the Banana Airline. And I thought, well, I could stay here and get a job with them and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I interviewed with them. After that, interviewed at Continental. After that, interviewed at TWA. And finally, I got the interview with American. And I got a class date with them, but I still had other interviews on that I could get to with before it was time for me to start my class at American. And we're talking about Delta, so of course I went to Atlanta to interview with them, and had a great time in Atlanta. I got to meet, I believe his name was Dr. Janis. Dr. Janis, and sit in his rocking chair. There's always this talk that was going around about being in Dr. Janis's rocking chair, and I got the impression that whether you rocked or did not rock kind of had an indication as to whether or not they were going to hire you. I was very fortunate in the fact that I already had a job in my pocket, so I didn't really care what Dr. Janis thought. And then when I finished that, I went in and talked to the chief pilot there, and his indication was that I was a reasonable candidate, so it looked like I was going to get hired there, until I made the mistake of asking him. I was still living in Phoenix at the time, but I had to go back to St. Louis, because I had another session that I was supposed to do with TWA. But when they give you a ticket or an airline ticket to come in, they give you a round-trip ticket from home to where they want to see you and then back to your home. And the last thing I asked him as I was just about to walk out of the office was, can I have a ticket? Can you reroute my ticket so I can go to St. Louis? Because that's where TWA was. He looked up from his desk, and he says, well, why are you going to St. Louis? And I said, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to fly all the way back to Phoenix and then to St. Louis when I got an interview in St. Louis day after tomorrow, and you can just let me go there. He gave me a look like, man, you really got a lot of nerve. But he did give me the ticket. And
But he didn't give you a job.
and he did offer me a job. Unlike John, I had to wait a little while. It wasn't immediate. But he did give me the ticket, and I went to St. Louis. But even when I went there, I still had the American thing in my pocket, so I knew where I was going. And that's kind of how my career started. I spent 39 years at American, and was very fortunate for going there as to the fact that when the Patco had the strike, a lot of the airlines that I would have gone to, with the exception of probably Delta, I would have been furloughed for a while, but I was able to hang on there once I got on property by typically my fingernails. And I want to talk a minute before I let somebody else speak about my interaction first interaction with OBAP and what it was about. When I went to pilot training, there were two black pilots on the base that were instructors. One of them happened to be Chappie James's son, Danny James. Another one that was there was Leon Johnson. And so they kind of took me under their wing fairly early on. And in talking to them, that was kind of my first introduction to OBAP. I had actually been to an OBAP meeting before I actually became a for real airline pilot. And I've been there ever since, with the exception of a short stint when some of us got a little bug up our butts, but I think most of us have gotten over that at this point. And I've been, I guess, working to continually increase the number of minority, particularly black pilots, not only at my company, but anywhere that I could help them get to. So that's my short blurb about how I got here and how I got started.
Yeah, please.
About pilot training. When I was in pilot training at Laredo Air Force Base in 1970, two pilots came to visit me. One was Chappie James. The second was Ray Dothert. He flew down to meet this African-American pilot down there in Laredo, and I appreciate it.
Wow. So you hear these names, and they're historical. Can you talk about the one name that was mentioned in the letter, Marlon Green? How much controversy, how much diversity, how much adversity?
Well, all of us have indications of what he went through, although we weren't flying with him. But when you go as the first African American to break in an airline, man, you're going to get so much stuff that it's almost impossible to survive, because you don't know how tough it can be. And they don't want you there. Like I said, there was not a big group of white pilots who say, let's get us an African American pilot. It was just the opposite. Let's not even give them interviews. So, you know, I've met Marlon, he's been to OBAP, but it's just a debt of gratitude we have for him, for us. And just glad he survived, and it went to the Supreme Court, and he got his original date of hire, 1963 versus 1967.
Any other want to elaborate?
Well, the only thing that I'm going to say, as far as first happened to be the first black pilot with Pan American, I had no idea that I was the first black pilot with Pan American. Pan American was an airline that did not fly domestically in the United States. We flew around the world. And so Pan Am had a little different culture, because they were dealing with all types of people all over the world. And they were flying to Africa, so they dealt with black people. So it was no big surprise that when I came on board, I had no problems with Pan American. It was a thing that most of the porters at the airport and everything, they were really surprised, and they were always coming around me, asking me questions, because they were very proud that all of a sudden they saw a black airline pilot. And so as far as having any adversity with Pan American, I never faced that.
So I start with getting the job or getting an offer for the job. Now you're on the job, and now your relationships not only with your fellow pilots, but all the agents that extenuate from that. Was that as challenging as getting the job? You mentioned, Captain Jones, that overseas it wasn't as big of a thing, but I know domestically there's a lot of strife that was going on. Did you all encounter any agencies once you got on?
Well, I think if I understand the question, when I first started flying with Pan American, I knew that as a new pilot, I would be on probation for a year. And as a result, this was my dream job. From the time I was 6 years old, I always wanted to fly an airplane. So I had gone through the normal routine of building model airplanes. Then I started building radio-controlled airplanes. And then I said, how am I going to achieve my dream of becoming a pilot? And that was when every night I went to bed, I was thinking, what can I do tomorrow that is going to help me get closer to that job? So, of course, all through junior high and high school, I took mathematics, physics, all of the sciences that I thought would be an enhancement for me getting the job. So when I went to the university, what was I going to do? I took mechanical engineering and aeronautical engineering. So I had a 5-year course where I could get 2 degrees in engineering. So that was going to set me up for my prime job, being a pilot. I was in Air Force ROTC at the University of Pittsburgh. And then after graduation, Lockheed Aircraft Corporation gave me a job as an engineer out in Burbank, California. And all of this was great to me because I was taking the book knowledge, making it very practical. And I was able to work on the precursor of the strategic bomber, the B-70 that the military was going to get. And Lockheed had the wing design, so I was working on that project. Lo and behold, as the military does things, they canceled the B-70 project. And then the military said, well, since you have been in Air Force ROTC, it's time for you to come to the military. So I left that job, went down to San Antonio, Texas, what was going to be pilots pre-flight. Now, there were 240 of us who were prospective pilots. There happened to have been 10 of us who were black out of the 240. So about a week before the course ended, they came out and said, well, the Strategic Air Force, they need navigators. And so we're going to have to ask 30 of you to volunteer to be a navigator. Now, of course, no one is going to raise their hand to be a navigator when you wanted to sit up front and be the pilot. So since they got no response, they said, well, we're just going to have to pick out of the hat. And so, like the military was at that time and the country, they picked out of the hat. They picked 30 guys out of the hat. 9 of us were black. So, of course, that was a fair way of doing it, you see. And the one black pilot, he went to pilot training, but 6 months later, he ended up in navigation school as well. So out of that class of 240 prospective pilots, 0 were left. And this was what we had back in 1959 and 1960. That was the lay of the land. And I looked at it because I wanted to be a pilot. I said, this is just going to be a bump in the road for me because I was determined that I was going to be a pilot. So I ended up going through navigation school, and since I graduated #1 in my class, I got the first choice. So where would I go? They said, well, you can go to Travis Air Force Base in California. Great assignment, California. Here we come. And I stayed as a navigator for 2 years, and then I happened to have gone into the officers club one day, and I helped the lady. And she was putting on a Christmas show, helped her, and after the Christmas show, she invited all of us to her house for dinner. Now, I'm driving over to the house for dinner, thinking, oh, well, this is nice. But I started driving, and I said, this is not where the normal people live. This was where all the generals and everything were. Rung the doorbell. The general comes to the door. Now, here I am, a first lieutenant, and the general is addressing me. And the general first said, Captain Jones, Lieutenant Jones at that time, he said, what do you want to do in this Air Force? And I said, well, I want to be a pilot, I want to be an astronaut, I want to get my master's degree. He said, Lieutenant, just wait. Let's take one thing at a time. So he wrote me a recommendation to Air Training Command, and I was in pilot training within 2 months. So that was my action prior to going to work with Pan American.
Well, I had a little experience going through pilot training. I went to Moore Air Base in Texas, which is about 15 miles from Reynosa, Mexico. And this place started training pilots in 1948. I went down there in 1959. They had never graduated an African American out of pilot training. There were civilian instructors with military supervision. And I happened to go down there with another African American that they flunked out before he got there, almost. And fortunately, I had had an instructor when I was in ROTC at Southern Illinois University, who a friend told me he was prejudiced, and I make my own decisions about whether a person is fair or unfair. And he wasn't prejudiced, he was just mean. He wanted you to fly an airplane a certain safe way. So we got along well, and I did well in that and got my private pilot's license things and went to Moore Air Base. And when I talked to the surgeon down there, he said, you don't want to go to Moore. I said, why not? He said, they don't graduate blacks from down there. And they hadn't in 11 years. And so I've always been a little bit stubborn. And I said, let me tell you something. I played first-string quarterback at a white university when they didn't have black quarterbacks, and I started my sophomore, junior, and senior year. I can handle those people down there. I went down to Moore, and lo and behold, my instructor was an exact copy of my instructor at SIU. We got along well. He taught me well, and I had no problems. And I studied hard because I was afraid. And all the pilots who were white would go to Mexico every weekend. I kept my rear end at Moore Air Base because I know their primary objective was to flunk me out. And so I, just studied hard, and it worked out well.
After I graduated from the University of New York in Buffalo, we had to take what's called a pre-entry physical before entering the Air Force. So this medical technician, without giving me a blood test, said I had poor eye acuity, poor eye accommodation, and sickle cell anemia. So of course now I'm off flying status. So I entered the Air Force as a logistics officer For 8 months, I'm a logistics officer until my commanding officer, after going over my personal history, saw that I had sickle cell anemia. So he gives me a call one day, says, Bailey, let's go play basketball. I said, sir? I said, let's go play basketball. Okay. I love basketball, so off we go to the base gym, and we're having a good time playing basketball. So after the game, we're on our way back to the base. He says, why aren't you on flying status? I said, sir, I believe I have sickle cell anemia. He said, Bailey, you don't have sickle cell anemia. You wouldn't be able to run up and down this basketball court the way you did if you had sickle cell anemia. 6 months later, I'm on flying status. I'm in pilot training in the Air Force at Laredo. That's an example.
Wow. So I bring out those challenges that you had in the beginning, and I try to transport that to the challenges that the folks out in the audience may have today. But let's kind of look at that dash in between those two periods. When you all started this, the BPPA morphed into Organization of Black Airline Pilots, morphed into the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. Was this on your landscape? Was this in your radar scope to where it is? And if not, what is most overwhelming about the process that you've seen?
Well, none of us expected it was going to be an easy road. And we happened to have a young man named Ben Thomas who came to my wife and me in 1975. And Ben had the design of what he called an organization for black airline pilots. And we sat down, and my wife was on a board, and I was on a board, so we knew a little bit about bylaws and constitutions. So we sat at our kitchen table in 1975 and started listening to Ben and trying to put what Ben's concepts and practices were, in fact, into order. But what happened is Ben showed up with this briefcase, and the briefcase was full of stuff, and Ben had already put together what he thought the organization should look like. So we put our input into it and came up with a set of bylaws and constitution for this organization that would be for black airline pilots. And then went into the process of trying to get a group of us together. And so Ben sent out a letter indicating it was about 40 pilots that he sent it out to, inviting them to an opening meeting, which was September 26th in 1976. And we got good response from it. And so we formed a get-together at O'Hare Airport for our first meeting. And we selected O'Hare Airport because they had a hotel right at the airport, so they could fly in and we could meet. And so we got together, and the number changes, but we had about 33 pilots there that day, and we started to go through it. And how many of you are either married to a pilot or know a pilot? Just raise your hand. Okay. All pilots think they're right, no matter what the situation is. So we went through some great discussions those couple of days trying to get us on the path of becoming an organization. And we broke down the Constitution and bylaws that they had been sent out, and we broke up into small groups and put in changes, deletions, additions, and we came up with our first formal Constitution and bylaws from that day. And one of the things we ran into is that we expected we should have more there, but a lot of the African American pilots, like so many other groups, they were sitting back to see if this gonna work. And I'm out here in this space, the only African American at an airline, everything else is white. You know, it's a little risky to go out on that plank by yourself. So this was something that had to be overcome. And as a fledgling organization, you know, we didn't have any money. We didn't have anything but the idea and trying to encourage people to get into it. And so often people are reluctant until they find that we have acceptance of the power structure, which was white pilots. And this is one of the things we go back and we talk to American. Our third meeting at the American, up until that time, we had no significant management people who were all white at the airlines to come. And Bud Eamon came to our first meeting, and he was a senior vice president for flight operations at American, which challenged and opened the door for other higher-ups in the airline industry, and particularly in flight operations, to start coming to our functions. And this is with a big impetus for us to get over the hump. You know, because in our first meetings, we had discussions, debates about what are we going to call this organization, because as you know, it was the BPPA, and we changed it to the Organization of Black Airline Pilots. And I won't tell you through some of the discussions we went through and how we resolved it, but that's how things got off of fit. Oh, and then the different airlines started competing, and some of the other gentlemen can tell you something about the competitions we had.
Well, one thing I would like to say is that when the organization was started and we started talking about what was going to be the dues of this organization. And I'm thinking, oh, the Organization of Black Airline Pilots, the cream of the crop. I thought that probably $1,000 a year would be a proper amount. Oh, boy, there was such an argument.
Perry, you forget, we were pilots. I mean, pilots are cheap. The only thing, pilots like a canoe. They won't tip or anything else.
And so we had a fight over that. I think we ended up with
$25.
$25. Now, we're the cream of the crop, but we're going to pay $25 a year for dues. That was a big...
That was a struggle. Couldn't get that from half of us.
That's right. And you know, and the reason that our organization really survived because we had workers. You know, Perry was president, I was president, but you know, only thing a president can do is hope that we get people to work. Okay, the two biggest workers at our organization sit on this stage. John Bailey, who was in charge of the Southeast region. We were broken up, and John kept the Southeast region building. We had functions down there. And then Chuck Rich, we were separated into one office was secretary and the other was treasurer. Our secretary didn't come back the next year, so we made Chuck secretary treasurer.
For life.
And for life. We called him Papa Doc Duvalier.
Here's our central office right here.
That's right.
The only thing that I want to say that initially, when we talk about the Southeast region in particular, it was the only region that systematically brought money into the organization. So this guy right here and the people down there in the Southeast region, if they throw a function, we come from all over the country to be there to hang out. The initial impetus, in my opinion, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, was we had good intentions, but we sure liked to party.
That's right. And I have to tell you about one instance about our party. We had a party, and Papa Doc was in charge of the door. And this one guy came up. He was single. He had 2 women on his arm. And Chuck said to him, "You can't come in." He said, "Why? You haven't paid your dues." "But I'll take care of it later." Chuck said, "Well, once you take care of your dues, you can come in." He said, I won't pay it. And what, it was about 15 minutes later?
Came back.
High-speed
So,
Well, can I say this real
Ye-
quick
yes, sir.
about Chuck and American? The reason Delta got involved was because when I first got our chief of pilot hiring to the convention for the first time, they embarrassed us. They embarrassed us. When we saw American taking the pilots who had committed to Delta, the next thing we see is on the stage, these guys are wearing American Airlines uniforms. Yes, we were upset. The next day after that convention, when I got to Atlanta, I get a call from the CEO, Mr. Mullen, wanted me in his office that day, that morning. And he said to me, tell me what we need to do to catch up to American. And that's how we got involved.
wow. So I have a bank of questions, but I'm sure the audience has some. So there are 2 mic stands. The protocol will be you come up, announce who you are, and who the question is going to be addressed to. Cap Duffy.
No, when Bill mentioned Bud Eamon, I'd like for you to emphasize that the reason why he was there was due to his relationship with Dave Harris.
Correct.
So that was
that
very
is correct.
significant of getting American on board. And like John said, once American got on board, then all the other airlines started getting on board.
But you know, this is one of the things about any organization, and one of the biggest contributors to our organization was Dave Harris, the first African American voluntarily hired by the airlines, because Dave was a person of reason, and Dave would calm us down quite often when we got in these little spats about what we're going to do. But like I say, he brought Bud Eamon there, and that embarrassed so many airlines, other top officials. We started getting CEOs speaking at our conventions. I know one thing that happened at United, you know, they got really embarrassed, and they started, ATR.
Yep.
They started giving ATR scholarships at the convention. And Chuck, you might say what American followed up with.
Well, just so we could kind of stay in the limelight a little bit, United was given airline transport ratings in their simulators when guys were still actually wanting to get a job that were qualified. So the next time that we met, our vice president of flight, his name is Cecil at the time, he was getting up giving a speech, and you have to have known Cecil. He was a dynamic country kind of guy, but really in our corner. And he says, well, all these other guys are giving ATRs. He says, well, I'm here to give out something else. I'm going to give out 10 jobs right here, right now. And that kind of set another goal and another stage for the other people to meet. So they're giving ATRs. Because when you got an ATR, it makes you available, more available or more cognizant to get a job. Okay, that's the whole ball game, to get these steps going so that you're more qualified or a better product for the airline. He says, well, I've looked at some things while I'm here, and I'm giving out 10 jobs. And he started calling out names of who he was hiring that night.
He sure did.
Rod Price, UPS. I was wondering, you talked about the history of the airlines becoming more interested in African American pilots, but I was curious, and then you went on and talked about the competition that eventually unfolded. What caused them to be so motivated to begin the hiring, which ended up causing them to become more competitive with each other to continue the hiring?
Okay, I'm going to be a little biased as I try to take a little bit of that question first. I think it was first to get that relationship with management. And as has already been spoken, Dave being the first African-American hired at American, and then the first black chief pilot. He was a chief pilot in Boston and Washington for a while. The first black check airman, captain check airman for a major airline. Because of his ability to interact with management on a level that was probably above where most pilots ever got to in their career, he got it started at American. And he brought those of us that were behind him, when he went to a meeting to see the CEO, or he went to a meeting to see the chief pilot, he'd take a couple of us with him. And so we got to nurture that same relationship and tell them that they were missing out on a valuable product that would increase not only the airline's visibility, because we'd have a more diverse population out there in the cockpits other than seeing the guys throwing bags on the ramp, that sort of thing. And not to disparage them, we did have a guy, Sam Samuels, who was a ramp guy, and even Dave helped him to get past that and become one of the pilots at American. So I think that played a big part in it, was getting somebody to get their foot in the door really well with people who could make decisions. Because it took us a long time to get to a point where you were actually in a position where you can actually go in. I could call Cecil, I could call Bud at home if I had a problem with either somebody on the line or somebody that we wanted to get hired.
Well, see, Rod, for Delta, I've been trying for years to get them to the OBAP conventions, and I was told we just can't find any qualified black pilots. I heard that over and over and over again. So to finally get chief of pilot hiring to our convention was a major win for me. And to have Cecil, show us the way to go and basically embarrassed us, then we changed it so that whereas he could hire on the spot, we couldn't. We could only invite you to Atlanta for an interview. Well, that's changed because of American.
Well, one thing I would like to add to give a little clearer perspective as to what was going on between 1963 and 1976. When the decree came out, the Supreme Court ruled that there would be no further discrimination in the hiring of blacks and minorities in the airline industry. So what happened? The airlines looked at pilots that they needed, by the way, because it was a strong industry back in those days. So they started hiring white females because they covered that position of being a minority. And I just want to make clear that probably when we look back at numbers, we probably hired one black to probably 10 white females, just to make that clear. But we had one pilot, Aaron Gould from UPS, who picked up the ball and he ran with it because he built relationships with all of the airlines. And he started to take young people who wanted to become pilots with the airlines, and he matched them up with various airlines. And I say, Aaron was one of the workers. Chuck Rich, John Bailey, Ray Washington. We have had workers. And you have to understand, in any organization, you might have 100 members in an organization, but you might only have 15 of them who is really doing the work. And as the president of an organization, you're only a director. And you have to pick the workers that you have to do the work, and you just have to give them guidance. So we have had some great workers, and I didn't want to leave out Aaron Gould because Many of you in this room probably now and flying for the airlines have gone with Aaron Gould, and he is the one that has made it possible that you got a job with the airlines.
Well, you know, my airline embarrassed me, you know, because they came down looking at different airlines about their discriminatory practices. And they went to Delta and they went to Eastern and they said, we're going to do better. They came to United and United said, we don't discriminate. And they say, well, you know, we don't want to take you to court, but you doesn't look good. And the senior vice president of personnel at that time said, we're going to win this. I told him, there's no way on God's green earth you can win this. So we were sued. They came with some other things, and they were still sluggish about hiring African-American pilots. So a congressional subcommittee chaired by Curtis Collins is an African-American representative, and it was a three-person subcommittee. She was chair. They had a New York representative there who was white male. They had another representative from Utah. And this guy from Utah said, well, don't you have at least one black pilot? And they said, oh, yeah. They said, that's proving they're not discriminating. They got one. And so anyway, after it was over, the senior vice president, who was different, he said to me, Bill, because I was president of OBAP at the time, he said, Bill, we got a problem. I said, no, you got a problem. We don't have a problem. You got a problem. And he said, well, would you come and visit with me in the office? I said, I had that offer years ago and never heard anything. But he called me the next morning, came in, and we were about to go on strike. So he said to me, but I know what you all think of me as a person, but could I help with this? And I said, well, how do you plan to help? I said, the problem is you have these lower people who are turning these African-American pilots away, and they're fully qualified. And he said, I said, how do you plan to change that? He said, well, let me tell you one thing. Anybody who turns down an African-American pilot who applies, now we're not going to hire all that apply, but anyone that turns one down has to explain to me why they turned them down. So Vanessa came in and kind of ran part of the pilot hiring program, and we went from 37 pilots, African Americans, at United in 3 years to 250. And it was mainly because of what Vanessa did. I helped her, you know, secondarily, but that made the big change in United.
Yes, sir.
I think we've kind of been, again, I'm Raymond Dothert. I got hired by the airlines in January 1971, Eastern Airlines. But I have kind of a different perspective on that whole thing because I look at it as kind of from a historical standpoint. I was in the Air Force from 1964 up until January 71. And I remember cities burning in 68 and 69 all across the United States. And that's when the government started doing a study to confirm that there was discrimination in industry. All of us knew that, but they had to put it on paper. And then after that, they came down with the affirmative action thing that you can't just say you got one or two, because people like Perry and Bill were hired in the early 60s. But after that, all the airlines had 1 to 5 black pilots, and they thought that would cover them. But then the government said, no, you gotta, it came out with affirmative action, so you gotta hire some qualified minority pilots. And then that was the thing, I think, that started the whole thing. So when I wore my uniform, every minority I would see, I would gladly speak to them and all that stuff, because they might have been one of those people out there burning cities, or at least knew somebody who was out there demonstrating and doing the fight. So that, to me, was why the airlines knew they had to start doing something because the government actually told them that. And then once they started, hiring black pilots, they realized that they're just as competent as any other pilot. And but like they were saying earlier, later on, people like Vanessa and other people who were in the airline industry actually was there, and also OBAP was a good vehicle to get more minority people in the airline industry, and they were very happy that we were there and able to do that. Thank you.
Well, one other thing we were talking about was the discrimination decree from the Supreme Court opened the door to white women as much or more so than it did for African American pilots. And we had a discussion about it, and we finally were smart enough to say, that's not a fight we want to get into. We don't want to talk about you hiring white women, but you're not hiring black, because, some of these white women grew up in airplanes. And then the pilots who were there who really disliked African Americans, they loved their daughters more, and they want to see them get jobs. So that was a fight we discussed, and it's a fight we couldn't win. So we stopped talking about, them getting too many jobs.
Hi, I'm Captain Johnny Edward Jones, Jr., otherwise known as the Jet. I just want to pay homage to all of you, especially John Bailey, who's my mentor, and got me to where I needed to be, even though I didn't get to work for Delta, but I came to United. And when I got to United, Bill, there was one or two black guys that were working in the training department, and I can't remember their names, but I want to think that they were Tuskegee Airmen, because none of the Tuskegee Airmen hardly, I think there's maybe one or two that got hired by the airlines. But can you speak to that?
I sure can. When I went to United in 1965, they had two African Americans who were Tuskegee Airmen, right, working in the training department. One of them was basically writing the manual for the 747 pilots. Right. And at the time, United was hiring 28-year-old or 22-year-olds with 185 hours in a Cessna 172. Mm-hmm. And one of the people who were in that training center who was helping with the 747, he had like 3,300 hours. Mm-hmm. But he was too old. His name was Bob Ashby.
That's him.
Bob Ashby actually was the first African-American Tuskegee Airman ever hired at an airline. He was hired at Frontier. And also, Bob was the first African-American airline pilot to retire. And Bob was in California, out in Arizona with us. Okay. So, and the other, Jim was one of the other guys who were there. But they just wouldn't even think about it. So United just had a bad reputation, yeah, which was earned, yeah. And it was a fact.
And I got hired in '88, but I had interviewed in 1985, right before the strike, mm-hmm, and was turned down.
Right.
And I got called back. And so, unbeknownst to me, was all those things happening with Congresswoman Carter Collins and Congressman John Conyers, and the NAACP was involved. And so that's how I got called back to get to another interview and got put in the pool and hired in '88. So once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I had a really rewarding career at United, and I owe it all to you guys, and Vanessa as well.
Well, now, when you say you owe it all to us, we all have to remember, we all owe things. Right. Look at Bessie Coleman. Yes. Yeah. Look at Chief Anderson. Right. Look at the Tuskegee Airmen, how much they went through to open the doors for us. So we have to tell young people that people have, shed tears, some shed blood to get us to where we are. And don't take these jobs lightly, that you have earned them just out of your ability. You have the ability, but you also have some history that got you here. So don't shirk on your responsibilities to pay it forward, and also be as proficient as you can as an airline pilot, because you're not going to get the same breaks that the white boys get today. You're not going to get it. You know, if you do the same thing, you will be brought before the chief pilot, and a white pilot won't.
Right.
So, you know, you gotta remember this. I always said, sometimes, and I worked hard in my craft, and I would talk to some of the white pilots United, and you know, we have proficiency checks. And they say, well, Bill, do you have a proficiency check? I say, I got one tomorrow. Well, aren't you nervous? I said, no, man, I work at my craft. And I said, if I go in there tomorrow and have a C ride in that simulator, it'll be an A ride for you. So don't, you know, we got to, we're good. We show that we're good every day, but don't let some little thing that's not important get you in trouble. And there's a chief pilot out there who has heard many, many things about that.
And the last thing I wanted to say was I did an interview with American and got turned down. I mean, it's the only airline that I had ever known that wanted a stew sample, so I guess mine didn't stink.
Since you brought that up, I want to speak to that real quick. I want to go back first to what Bill was talking about when he went down to Texas for his primary training in the Air Force, and then segue that into, I spoke, when I initially spoke, I said Leon Johnson was one of the black pilots that was at the base when I started pilot training. Well, General Johnson, as he retired, was also an airline pilot, but he was very instrumental in stopping the United States Air Force from sending single black pilots to bases where the attrition rate was 99.9%. So we got the Air Force to agree that they could not go alone, first off, because you had a lot of guys coming out of historically black colleges that all of a sudden they're thrust into a totally white environment, and you're just not going to survive there. You take that and you send them to Craig Air Force Base, where they're now thrown into a very, very racially unfriendly place. They're not going to make it there. So he was very instrumental in writing and getting the Air Force to say, okay, we won't send you to Craig anymore. So we didn't send any black pilots.
By yourself.
We wouldn't send them, period, for a long time. And I don't know if Craig is even still open. But we didn't send them into Craig. We wouldn't send them into Big Springs, Texas. There's 3 or 4 bases where black pilots, once you got out of college, you just wouldn't go there. And it was because Leon wrote to the Air Force and said, hey, we're not getting anybody through these programs. Well, look at Bill.
No. It wasn't 10, it was 15. 1915. No, and I got through. Again, I worked hard in my craft, and it was in Selma, Alabama, in 1960, and I saw the Klan ride.
Yeah.
In fact, Broad Street, Molly's doing this here, but on Broad Street, I saw the Klan ride and drive into City Hall parking lot. And you know, that's scary.
Yeah.
That is really scary.
Don't want to cross the bridge there.
No, I said, if I can get my so-and-so to Edmund Pettus Bridge, I can beat him to the base. You know, but it was scary. I mean, when you see these people going through red lights with these little pointy things on their head. So I tell you what, I praise you for getting that change.
One other thing with the stool sample. That wasn't the thing that was killing guys at American that we got to the interview process, but it was the medical department. And Dave Harris, myself, and Sam Samuels went in to see the CEO of our company. We got a meeting with him. We got our ducks lined up before we went to see him, and what was killing him was the medical department and sickle cell. Sickle cell, they said, they told probably 60 to 70% of our applicants that we brought in that had flown in the military, flown civilian, you got the sickle cell trait. If you got the sickle cell trait, we're not going to hire you. American at one time had the worst or the most strenuous physical of all the airlines.
Astronaut physical. Yep.
But we went in, we said, something's not right here. And Crandall said, and Crandall he was kind of a schmuck in the, there are no kids in here. He was kind of a jerk I'm going to leave it at that, in the airline industry, but he was fair. So we went in, we took him our paperwork, and he called his medical director into his office and said, hey, these guys got a problem. I want you to get it resolved. I want you to take whatever it is that you're taking to disqualify all of these candidates, and I want you to send it out to an independent laboratory and see if they disqualify it, the same thing that your department disqualifying these people on.
Oh, what do you want, Bob?
But what you just mentioned about sickle cell trait,
Yes?
do we have any nurses in here? Doctors?
Yeah, use the mic.
Emily.
Use the mic, Bob. Bob, use the mic.
Oh, to follow up on you, when I joined the Air Force, they gave me this same statement. You have a sickle cell trait.
Trait.
However, most of you know me. I'm pretty defensive. And I said, yes, I do. Just like 99% of every other African American in this country. A trait is not a disease.
It's not the disease. Okay, so we got our CEO, the head guy at our company, to bring his medical director in and say, I want you to send this out I want you to send out 25 of these samples, and I don't want any names or any pictures or anything to go with it on these samples, and I want them to come back. Well, he did that. The medical director did that. Sent them out. About a couple of months later, we get the results back, and Crandall calls us in for another meeting. And what Crandall didn't know and what Dr. Wick didn't know was that we found out that Dr. Wick found a buddy of his to do this audit. And so we go in to see Mr. Crandall. Wick's there. And Crandall says, well, we got the results back. And Crandall was a smoker. He had a very gruff voice. He says, well, we couldn't find anything wrong. And we raised our hands slowly. And we said, this report that Dr. Wick has brought back to you is not worth the paper that it's written on. Well, what do you mean? He sent it out to one of his college buddies to do the test. We don't believe anything that's on it. Crandall looked at the doctor and said, is this true? And he couldn't say anything but, yeah, it's the truth. And he dismissed the three of us, me, Sam Samuels, and Dave Harris. And about 6 months later, Dr. Wick no longer worked at American Airlines. He sent the test out again, came back with the results that we thought it would have. Having the trait, or some of them didn't even have the trait, was not going to disqualify people from being hired at American Airlines. So once again, that all falls back to that legacy of Dave Harris being able to have that kind of relationship with those people at the top where we could get in to see the people that, because Wick didn't answer to anybody but Crandall. He answered to nobody at American Airlines except Crandall, and he was gone. And we started to get more new hires through the process.
So we have time for 2 questions, and then we're going to roll a video.
Man was standing here for a little while. Okay. All right, let's fast forward because you guys opened the doors and we stand on your shoulders, each one of you. I'm Captain Carl Minter, retired United Airlines. In today's generation, one of the things that you had was education. Now in the hiring process, they don't require education, okay? They don't require a college degree, right? So that impacts decision-making and intellectual maturity, cultural maturity, all of those things that are necessary to make good decisions. So you have young people now coming into the industry, getting the jobs, thinking that they got the jobs just based on their own volition of walking in the door. What do you think?
I'm going to say one thing real quick, since my mic's still hot. When they were hiring all those white guys way back in the early years, they didn't have no education. Some of them came straight from crop dusters and off the farm. I mean, and they made it, and they did a reasonable job, some of them, but a lot of them didn't. So, yeah, we're not requiring, or the airlines, let's say the airlines are not requiring it, but they have a history of knowing that it was something they put on early on to keep us out. So I personally don't have a problem with that.
If you can imagine in the 1970s in the Deep South, flying with former crop dusters, but 15 to 20% of the pilots we flew with were members of the KKK. Malcolm.
Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Robinson. I'm a flight instructor with Aviation Career Enrichment in Atlanta, Georgia. I have a two-part question about inspiration. First part is directed for Captain Bailey. Captain Bailey's been my mentor for about 20 years or more, and I don't think I've ever asked you what inspired you to become a pilot.
Money. No, don't take the wrong way. When I was in college in ROTC, my family was not well off. I found out that if you join ROTC, they paid you $40 a month. And if you join the flight program, they paid you an additional $10. Hey, I'm in.
Plus free flight.
And that's primarily why I became a pilot.
Okay. And then the second is for the whole panel, but what inspired you all to foster and try to create more pilots and do everything that you guys have been doing with OBAP?
Well, the big thing, a lot of people work to get us here. We have a responsibility and an obligation, and we should have the desire to help others get to where we are. And the only way to do it is for us to mentor, for us to tell them when they're ready, and if they're not doing it properly, we have to tell them it's wrong. My thing when I talk to people is that whoever you're dealing with interpersonally, if they're not helping you reach your goals, kick them to the side. It's that simple.
And one thing I would like to add to this, sure, the Tuskegee Airmen, they set the bar very high. And so all of us, when we came to work with the airlines, we knew that we had to try to reach that bar. And that's the most important thing. Now, I'm sure that all of us sitting here on this panel, we have an obligation. We have an obligation to reach back, to help anyone. They don't have to be wanting to become a pilot. I just think we have an obligation to help someone to achieve the goals that they have set for their life. So when we do pass on with the Tuskegee Airmen, that people can say they did a good job, they reached out, and they helped someone else. And that's the most important thing, because if you live your life and never reach out to try to help someone, why were you here? And that's the main thing I want you to take with you. And just remember, those of you new pilots, someone is always watching you. I don't care whether you're walking down the terminal or whether you're up in the cockpit, someone is watching you. And just make sure that you do the best job that you possibly can. And that's what we ask of you. Just continue this legacy, and remember, the bar is set high, and just reach that bar.
And I want to say as my closing little speech here, I never imagined that this organization would be where it is today. This new generation is taking us to heights that I am just so proud of. I'm proud to say that I'm a member of OBAP, and I'm proud to see what direction you're going in. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm very proud to be a member, and I'm very happy to see the number of new young pilots. It's amazing to me, but more importantly, like Anya, the number of female pilots just does my heart good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And the thing about it is, we were limited in what we could do. And we looked at what the organization looks like now. It's amazing because you're doing such a wonderful job, and we couldn't even imagine reaching these type of heights. Just, I mean, we had limited understanding of what it means to run a professional organization. Our professional organization was basically, each one of us had names of pilots that should be interviewed. But when you look at the organization right now and how much it encourages youngsters, how much it gives the money and the time, and also the mentorship to help these young people have the possibility in their minds that they become successful, whether it's pilot, whether it's, mechanic, whatever it is, that they can reach that goal. And you see all of them out there that are eager. It's because the organization has expanded to the point and keeps growing, and we had no idea of this, none whatsoever.
Okay, so is it?
Oh, no, just a quick comment. More likely for Captain Norwood. Could you expand, because you started on some history there. Could you expand a little bit on the Tracy Aces from Colorado?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
United hired a bunch of people they called the Tracy Aces. And they got training out in California, and they were all kids. They all got jobs. And nobody questions that. And the thing about it is that, pilots are kind of selfish. And some of the white pilots I flew with were more selfish. And they would come up things like, well, if you can have 350 hours, you can be interviewed at United. And we're just not getting the quality we had. And I said, well, now, I'm not the brightest person in the world, but I knew a little bit about math. If someone's applying with 350 hours, and United hired pilots with 185 hours and 172, generally, might be exceptions, but generally, shouldn't a pilot with 350 hours be a lot better than a pilot, more talented than a pilot with 185? Well, you just don't understand. I said, let me tell you something. You're a 185-hour wonder. You're in the boat, you don't want anybody else in it. So don't give me this stuff. And sometimes you have to make a list of the group that you're dealing with. And just tell them, hey, here, you were hired with 185 hours. And you're going to complain about somebody only having 350 hours? Oh, come on. So, that's where we are. And we have to state and not convince, but state where the disparity and where the tiny thinking that sometimes pilots who are privileged enough to be in a cockpit think they're the only one. The old attitude, I'm in the boat, let's not put anybody else in it. So, it's still a struggle for youngsters. And we have to instruct them that they're, might always be a struggle. But you think about Fannie Lou Hamer. What did she say? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So just have the youngsters keep their focus on the ball, and also encourage everyone to be a member of OBAP. Just a short story. When we were out here trying to get Vanessa and I sent a letter out through company mail to 250 pilots and said, you should join OBAP. And Molly said, number one, you don't want to send that through company mail. Somebody's going to have it tomorrow. The next day, Bill Traub called me. Said, well, Bill, you know, I don't agree with this. Could I talk to you? I said, I'm coming out for a PC. I'll come in early and come talk to you. And he asked me, well, Bill, why do you say something like this? I said, number one, your training center is racist. We even had an instructor to tell an African-American going through that don't worry about it, I could teach a monkey to fly. Now, they actually said that. So Bill Traub said, well, Bill, I'm going to try to help where I can. And Bill Traub, there were 2 African-Americans who were working in the simulator, not as instructors. Bill Traub took a liking to them. He helped them get their training, helped pay for some of their training. Since that united, they had an entree into. So both of them got jobs from being mechanical operators to the simulators to being pilots. And I ran into them one day, one of them. And I said, well, you know, OBAP convention is coming up in a week. Are you going? Well, no, I'm too busy. I said, what you mean you're too busy? Well, you know, OBAP doesn't do that much for us anyway. I said, the only reason you got a job, OBAP got it for you. And I said, just a little side note. Since you don't want to help anybody else, if you come up where the company is going to fire your butt, and I said something different than butt, I'm going to be on the company side to fire you. You're not doing anything for us. You know, everything that's been given to you and help you achieve, now you're discarding because you're so good.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much. All right. So, what a great time we've had. As we celebrate 50 years of impact, it's important to remember that OBAP's story didn't start here. It started with visionaries, trailblazers who dared to defy the odds, open doors, and lift others as they climbed. This year, as part of the 50th anniversary celebration, we're honoring that legacy with something special, a feature-length documentary that tells the story of OBAP from the beginning, in the words of the people who lived it. This truly personifies the Lifted by legacy. The full film premiere next year in Chicago at our 50th annual conference. But today, we're proud to provide you a first look. So I leave you all with these 4 words of encouragement. Courage, commitment, compliance, and connectivity. These should resonate, they should replicate, and they should personify all that you get from this convention. Take the time, stop, ask questions, get to know the true history behind things. Some of you all think that it's challenging now. Think about what it was for them. Think about all the blood, sweat, and tears they poured in to make an opportunity for each of us. And we have to pay that back. Thank you all for attending.